Hi, I'm Kyle Bleeker, the pastor of Friends Church in Tustin, and I'm glad you're checking out some of our online content today. Along with our in person gatherings, which are every Sunday at 10 a.m., we have a number of different ways to help people get connected to our community and discover what God, the Bible, and Jesus have to do with your life. So check out our website to learn more or send our team a message directly using one of the links so we can help you find your way. Thanks again for taking the time. Now, on to this week's message. Cool. Hey, so glad to be able to be here with you this morning. I'm actually going to talk to you a little bit about water to start, but not water coming down, but talking to you about a river. Okay. When I was in college, I went to school out where I grew up, which is in the Midwest in Iowa. And a little ways away from the college that I was at, there was a river called the Sioux River, the Big Sioux, right? And my buddies and I discovered when we were kind of in our early years of college that there was a way to go down to the river at a kind of like a county park. And there was this amazing sandbar that actually got built up kind of around a bend of the river. And it was a big sandbar, and what we would do is on a Friday or Saturday night, we would go out there and we would build a fire on this sandbar, and the water would just be coming by us real chill, real tranquil. And we could hang out there, until 2 o'clock in the morning, and nobody ever bothered us. It was like kind of our little getaway spot, right? And you had to find those out in Iowa because you can only hang in a cornfield for so long, right? But we had this little spot along the river that was really, really fun. And sometimes at the end of the summer, what we would do is, because the water would be warm and the water would be a little bit more shallow, it wasn't really flowing, we would just float. So we wouldn't even bring a tube or anything like that along. We would just be in our swimsuits, and if you can practice. Anybody can do a dead man's float where you actually can float in the water? No, none of you. You all sink. Okay. We got pretty good at it where you could just float, and it would be these beautiful days where the sun is kind of setting, it's warm, and we were just chilling in the river and had this opportunity. I remember one time in particular, I closed my eyes, and I literally just was floating in this very tranquil, calm experience. I was like, wow, this is the life. And then I kind of opened my eyes, and I heard one of my buddies yelling. And I looked back up the river, and I had just kind of taken by the current, floated, I don't know, half a mile downstream. You're like, wow, I was zen, right? I was really in the moment, right? I was way, way down there. And I kind of, put my feet down. The water wasn't overly deep, probably about up to my waist. And I proceeded then to start kind of trudging back. And I felt at that time the power of the river. I hadn't really experienced it yet, but as soon as I turned around and I started walking back up, and then I swam for a little while, and I was just getting tired. And this river, which looked so peaceful, actually had a great deal of flow and strength that had moved me far quicker and far faster down the river than what I was anticipating. And so I ended up, trudging back, walking back, swimming back. I went to the side a couple of times and realized that's not going to work. And so I got really, really exhausted. I wasn't in any danger because of the depth of the water and because, we were close by. But finally I got back, and my friends all just laughed at me. They were like, what were you doing? We thought you were dead, right? They were like, what were you doing? And I was like, sorry, I was just taking in the moment, and I wasn't aware of kind of the push and the force of the current. Now, maybe you know a little bit of where I'm going right now, but today we have the chance to be able to read the last of the Beatitudes, which are these statements that Jesus made in his most famous teaching, which is called the Sermon on the Mount, where he teaches about what the blessed life looks like. What does it look like to have the good life? And when he taught this crowd of people that gathered around him, he had these different little phrases that he got to. And the last one is about what does it look like when you are living in such a way that you are going against the current of the culture and of life around you. And it pushes hard against you to try and get you to potentially turn in a different direction or go a different way. That's what the last beatitude ends up looking at. It is the grittiest of the Beatitudes. It is the one that talks about hostility that exists from people outside of your own life. And so that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to take a look at Matthew chapter 5. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. If you have a cell phone, you can pull it out and look up Matthew chapter 5. We're going to read through all of the Beatitudes again. There's 8 of them. And then we get to this one. It is the longest, but it talks about what does it look like to actually experience persecution for your relationship with Jesus. So I'll pray and then we can read. Let's start in. God, thank you for your scripture. Thank you for your teaching. May it land within our hearts in the right way and teach us more about what it looks like to follow you. We love you. Amen. So Matthew chapter 5, verse 1 through 8 says this. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. And he said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Note that. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And then this is our text for today. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, when they persecute you, they falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That group of statements is Jesus' way of painting a picture of the people who belong to the kingdom of heaven. If you note, the first beatitude starts with a reward, which is the kingdom of heaven. And like any circle that you draw, which begins and ends in the same place, Jesus comes to the end of his beatitude teaching, and he has the same reward. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Jesus is trying to help everybody who's listening to him wrap their minds around what it looks like to participate not in the nation of Israel or not in the nation of Rome, not in any other movement, but to be a part of what he refers to as the kingdom of heaven, of which he is the king. And as he's stating this, he's bringing up the fact that if you actually lived out those Beatitudes that were spoken of before, the blesseds, that there's going to be something unique and different about you that will mark you not as a citizen of a certain country or a certain movement, but that will mark you as being a citizen of the kingdom of heaven. And that's really, really interesting. Because when I look at that list, it's a big list. I don't like it. This is maybe an interesting thing to hear a pastor say. I don't like it. I look at it and I understand parts of it, but I get to a point where I'm like, wow, what a miserable list, right? Couldn't it be a little bit shinier, a little bit more glamorous? Couldn't it be something maybe a little bit more hopeful? But instead, we talk about mourning. We talk about the need for mercy. And I get to a point where I don't like it. This whole series, we've been at this since, September. And I want you to know that week in and week out, sometimes having to teach a message on this, but sometimes sitting in a life group or just reflecting on these passages, I have felt myself consistently convicted by it. I have found that when it calls for me to be merciful so that I can receive mercy, that one's tough for me. And so here's a question that I have for you. Which of the Beatitudes, maybe you'll never hear this question again in any type of church setting that you're in, which one do you like the least? Which one, when you look at it, you're like, oh no, that one gets me. It irks me. It bothers me. Maybe it's the fact that when it comes to this kingdom that Jesus is talking about, he's not saying that this is a kingdom that is won by using all of your might to storm the gates. Instead, what he's describing is the fact that this is a kingdom that you are welcomed into through the low door of your weakness, of your longing, of your mercy, of your hunger, your mourning, and even what they're talking about today, your mistreatment. That strangely enough, to enter into this kingdom, there is a spot to go through that you'll never find if your head is up and your arms are bared, but rather when you're on your knees or when you are feeling low and down, that is where you find entrance and are welcomed into a different kind of life. I don't like that. I struggle with it. I have a hard time with it because one of the things is that it's odd, it's kind of foreign, and it strikes me as backwards, and it strikes me as, upside down. This isn't the way that I kind of want to live. It's not the way that I want to move forward in my own life. I want to be able to be applauded for or to be recognized. I want to be rewarded for the things that I can accomplish. And here's where I get to with all of that. I realize that one of the reasons why I don't like the Beatitudes and why I struggle with them, even at the same time that I can acknowledge that they are more true and honest and real than often what is marketed to us or is given to us as the picture of human life. Human life is difficult. If you look around, not only within the United States, but at the greater global picture, you will understand the fact that human life is challenging. It is blood and sweat and tears and hurt and tragedy and yes, a continued fight for movement forward, but also at the same time just an acknowledgement that this is a hard existence that we have. And I think that the Beatitudes are unflinching in their willingness to say, this is what life is like. And I don't always want to engage with that because sometimes if I can stay distracted or keep my eyes on something else, then I don't have to deal with what that means for me and for my neighbor and for other people out within the world. So what I realize about the Beatitudes is that they threaten me. I am saying all these things like how odd, how foreign, but I don't often look at the Beatitudes and think how dangerous. And yet they are. They are very, very dangerous. They are dangerous to our comfort. They threaten our sense of stability and control. They challenge our identity and who we see ourselves as. And in the midst of that, we who are people who are at least today curious about Jesus, we have to recognize that our King does not look like other kings. And the kingdom that he offers us, this kingdom of heaven, is not like other kingdoms. And so we have to have a question whether or not we truly want to engage with this kind of life, or if we would rather maybe, throw in with a different kingdom or with a different pursuit. And this is where, when you get to the final beatitude, it really lays it all out there. And it puts it in stark contrast. This idea that those who are righteous will actually be persecuted. That they will be so different or so strange in the king that they serve and the life that they live that there will be those who look at them and are threatened by them. Not just because they are mourning or because they are meek or because they are showing mercy, but because the way they live their life actually identifies them as a citizen of a different kind of king, working for a different kingdom. And in that, power is threatened. That's why they're dangerous. They're dangerous to me personally, but they're also dangerous to the world when I start living them out. Because they call people to consider that maybe the way that we're going about life isn't exactly right. So the word persecuted, which comes up a couple times and is really the center, kind of statement of this teaching. It meant back in the day the idea of being relentlessly chased down. So hunted like prey or driven like vermin, okay? So hunted like prey, there's this idea of like, I'm going to, track down this deer and I'm not going to let it get away. and then I'm going to make use of it, right? But there was also this sense of driven like vermin. I'm going to literally get this and exterminate it because it is a problem for my life. It brings disease or whatever else. And so that is a strong word. It wasn't something light. And it happens to be that Jesus states that this persecution is not just for any old reason. Like, it's not, hey, I'm sorry when people bully you because they don't like your t-shirt, right? This is stating that you are persecuted because of rightness. You are so aligned with the heart of God that everything else that's crooked or twisted is kind of revealed for what it is when you come on the scene. And that because of that, people actually target you because they don't want to step into the light and have what they are doing exposed. And so when you come and you are justified, not by what you've done, but by Christ, then they don't want to get justified with you. They don't want to have to come into that kind of a life. And so instead, what do? They seek to rage against you, tear you down, say evil things against you because they would love it if you were just not on the scene anymore. So to be persecuted because of righteousness is ultimately, Jesus is speaking about those who are in line with the heart of God. And so when they show mercy, when they act out peace, when they are willing to be meek and limited, or when they are willing to mourn because they are broken by the world, Jesus is saying, now you are close to God's heart, but look out, because other people will have a hard time with that. That's because the Beatitudes are not saving us from difficulty. That is not what they were written for. They are not trying to give us a shield so that we never have to go through anything challenging in life. They are actually preparing us for challenge. Jesus was calling his shot and saying, this is what your life is going to look like if you enter into the kingdom of heaven. Be ready. So, what does persecution look like here in America and within our world today? We'll look at persecution in terms of America in just a minute. What I want to talk about, though, is what persecution looks like within the global picture of the church. We're right here in Tustin, California. We are at a public school being able to meet together. This morning you had to brave the rain, but nobody was armed with a gun or anything else like that. Okay? None of you are here in secret, I don't think, right? If you are, you don't have to tell us, right? But you were able to arrive here on very different terms than other people within the world. So the norm for the American Christian is we wake up and we think, today I go to work. Today I go to school. Today I go shopping. Maybe on Sunday, if it works for me, I'll go to church. But what's the norm for global Christians in specific countries where persecution is active and is constant? The thought is, today my home is going to be taken. Today, I lose my connections to my family. Today, I go to prison because I am God's church. Not because I'm going to God's church, but because I am God's church. That's their norm. There's a website that I have really appreciated in the last couple of years, which is referred to as Open Doors. There's Open Doors International, and then there's opendoorsus.org. And I want to show you a slide real quick, just of a couple of numbers. I've shared these once before, but I think it's important for us in this day and age to make sure that we're aware of what's going on in the global church. Open Doors, great resource and website. I would encourage every single one of you before the day ends to look it up. But they talk about the fact that there's 7,679 churches and public Christian properties that were attacked or closed within the last year in the world. That's a lot. There's 4,476 people who were murdered. Okay, these people were actually killed for their faith this past year. And then another statistic that's really wild, there's 209,771 people who were displaced. These are people who are fleeing or running from persecution, and so because of that, they had to leave behind everything that they had. I think there's one more statistic up there, 4,744 Christians that are imprisoned. They are potentially in there without trial or with any type of representation. They don't know when they're going to get out, and they have been locked away. Why? Because they connect themselves and identify with a king and a kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, which is a threat to the nations and the powers that oversee the areas where they live. That's a big deal. 380 million Christians in the world are facing high levels of persecution and discrimination every single day. 380 million. So, I lay that out there for you because I want you to understand that as we read this passage, we have to be able to think about the community that Jesus was originally speaking to, who were an oppressed people group. They were occupied by the Roman power, and as they continued to follow Jesus, they gradually, when the church started, began to be targeted in really violent and aggressive ways. And we have to understand that that was what the early church was like. Then we have to also be able to picture that there are Christians in many other countries, specifically the 5 top countries where the oppression is the greatest is North Korea, Somalia, Yemen, Libya, and Sudan. These 5 countries are places of high persecution and violence where if you are a Christian, you could potentially die or be hurt any day, okay? We have to think about that group of people as well, and then we have to think about our context. So 3 different groups: early church, global church, Tustin church. And when we think in that way, we read the word persecuted in a slightly different way. I hope you're feeling that, okay? Persecution, the criteria for persecution as it's kind of described on Open Door is specifically these criteria. That you have been rejected by family. By choosing Jesus, your family is saying you're not choosing us, maybe because of a difference of faith. Then lost access to children for being a follower of Jesus. This is truly sad, but if you identify with Jesus, your spouse does not, or your family does not, they would take away your children. If you've been kicked out of your home, unable to find work, that's a reality. If you've had to flee to avoid rape, abuse, or death for being a follower of Jesus, that's a real reality. Been imprisoned without trial or representation, or had resources or property seized for being a follower of Jesus. Those are challenging statements. Those are the things that so many of us here in America grab onto, right? Family, our own health, our resources. Those are the things that get targeted and get persecuted because people want you to change your mind. They don't want you to continue with that kingdom. And what is the central kind of piece of this passage that I when I read it over and over again, I just kept coming back to it, was that Jesus is talking about persecution. He's not saying, that it's never going to come. He actually is saying, listen, this is going to happen, and you are actually blessed when this happens. How wild is that? And he comes to a point where I think the central focus is these 3 words: because of me. Why are these people coming under fire? Why are they, getting lashed out at? It's because of Jesus. It's about a relationship with Jesus. It is because we have acknowledged that he is our king, and he is our friend, and he is our brother. And we've come to a spot where the relationship with him is of such high value and beauty and goodness, and it's done so much within our life that we have to say, you know what? Whatever else is on the table, whatever chips I've got, resources or things I've got going for me, they, in comparison, they just don't stack up. And so I got to go with him. And wherever he's going, I'm going to follow him. And the challenge is that we would not just be fans of Jesus, rooting for him when all is good, and saying like, yeah, you go, Jesus, sure like those teachings of yours. Probably not going to follow through on anything this week, not going to actually obey. Like I'm a fair weather fan. But no, that we would actually follow this king into the very life to look like the life that he lived. Do you know what Jesus' life looked like? It was hard. It was confrontation. It was loving people who at times did not understand him. It was laying down and actually sacrificing himself. And then it was him dying. Did you know that when you sign up to be a Christian, that you sign up to potentially die? Just so you know, you all will eventually die. But you're signing up to be a part of a movement that could lead you to a place where you die. Two quotes for you that are from Open Door. One is from a woman named Zara, who is actually located in the Sudan. And so I'll read it to you. I am determined to stay here despite the risks to my comfort and safety, because I believe everyone deserves to hear about God's love. Sorry, she's in Yemen. And then another quote from a woman who actually was free from North Korea, but then went back. And she stated this, I feel a calling to share everything I've learned with other secret believers in North Korea, my homeland. Do you see the difference of what following Jesus as not as a fan, but as like being awake to the reality pushes these people into? That's a big deal. And here's just what I want to kind of relay to all of you. I hope that right now you're feeling a little bit of the weight of what exists within the global church. But I don't want you to feel like we all are terrible and that we aren't, actually experiencing some type of difficulty as well. And so what I want to clarify is that there is a big difference between persecution and pressure. So we've talked about early church. We talked now about the global church. But what I want to talk to you about today is pressure. And so you here as Christians, if you're sitting back and thinking, no one ever throws stones at my windows or, curses at me or is trying to take away my children. So I guess, there's no enemy out there trying to get me. Guess I'll just keep doing what I'm doing. I want you to understand that's not the truth. That would be silly for us to sit here and think, there's nothing that's going against us. Not the case at all. Please understand that when I was in that river floating along, there was a current that was pushing me and taking me, drifting me farther from where I was supposed to be. And guess what? It was so smooth, so warm and nice that it just felt like what a ride to be on, right? But it was dangerous because it was pushing me farther and farther away from the very thing that I was supposed to be about. And that is the reality, the picture that I want to give to you about our culture. We live in a world that you might look around and think, well, everything's good here. And I would just say to you, no, everything is not good here. We are not living in a world that is pro-Jesus. We are not living in a city that is just adamant about the gospel and about the Bible. We are instead in an environment, yes, in America, that is actually similar to the experience that the Israelites had when they were in exile in Babylon. A lot of people today are talking about the fact that the experience of Christians today, where you walk around and you say, why am I so exhausted? Why am I so tired? Why do I feel confused and kind of battered about? Why is it that I can't seem to get traction with my neighbors or with other people around me about the gospel? What's going on? Why does it seem to fall on dead ears? Or for us, as we've tried to plant this church, why is it that everybody in Tustin isn't like, new church? We'll be there on Sunday, right? Why isn't that happening, right? Or why is it that when we looked for locations to be able to host a church on Sunday with money to pay, that we were repeatedly told, yep, no room. No spot, can't work, right? By schools, by organizations, by people who we were ready to pay them, and they said, no, not here. Why is that the case? It is because there is a current, smooth as it might be, and seamless as it seems to be, that is actually pushing everybody in this world, not according to the compass and the bearing of Jesus Christ, but to whatever current and direction the river is taking it. And you have to understand that where you sit, not only is the world pushing whichever direction it wants to go, right? But you within yourself, you are broken. And so you have desires and other things that are constantly trying to pull you to different shores or to different ideas or temptations because you're hopeful that maybe that will be what give you rest. And then there's the last thing. You have an enemy. You have an enemy that hates you. The devil is very, very real. Jesus speaks often about the fact that not only is he real, but he is the prince of this world. He has power. He has influence. He's limited, But he is a master of lies and murder. And one of the things that he desires to do is to actually infiltrate your mind and your heart so that he doesn't even have to come to your house and burn it down. All he has to do is put an idea in your head, a little spark that will burn down your marriage, that will burn down your understanding of yourself, that will burn down your relationships with others or your ability to actually see God. That's what the devil is doing. And that's why when we're told again and again in Ephesians about this nature, it says, finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And it says this, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. We have to wake up to the fact that even though we are so blessed to not live in an environment where we have fear about who's going to come through those doors when we're meeting to talk about Jesus, you have to recognize the fact that we are soaked in lies, in confusion. That the number of people in our world right now who are literally not taking up a gun or taking up a substance to be able to kill someone else, although that is happening, but who also are considering doing violence to themselves, should wake us up to the fact that we are immersed in something that is very, very wrong. And it is not drifting us or taking us to a place of greater peace, but rather taking us to a waterfall that will drop us off the edge and not care, but rather will rejoice in our persecution, our destruction. 1 Peter 5, verse 8 through 9 says this, be alert and of sober mind. Be alert and of sober mind? Why? Why in the world would he start about that when he's talking about the enemy, the devil? It's because for a pastor or for a mom, or for somebody in their 20s, or for a high school student, this is where the battlefield is. This is where the battlefield is. And unless we are, as a group of people, ready to guard our hearts and minds and actually do the work of sifting through ideas and sifting through relationships to get to a place where we are grounded and founded in what Jesus is calling us to, if we don't do that, guess what's going to happen? Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings. Our sufferings are different, and they have a unique role that they play within our lives. We have great resources here, and one of the things that we have to figure out is how do we supply with the resources that we have the communities that are all across the world that are really struggling, right? But there are things that they are rich in as well, and there may be things that we need to learn from them so that we can all be a greater community, a greater family of faith. The devil's tactics, I'm just going to show this list. I've shown this before. The devil's tactics are to attack us, sometimes openly. And you have to know that to be a Christian actually is a threat to your physical well-being, to your mental health, to your emotional health, to your relational connection. It's a threat. Every time I bring up offering, I know that everybody feels a little threat to their finances, right? They're like, oh, here he is asking again. I wish he'd take a week off, right? But you have to understand that if I don't challenge you, if we don't let the scriptures challenge us, then we're just drifting. And eventually we'll get to a spot where we're too far gone. I hope as a church that we continue to press in with each other, to seek hard after who Jesus Christ is, to not just be fans of him, but to be followers in such a way where we get an amazing reputation within the city of Tustin for being people that you can trust, people who will cry with you, people who will give of their mercy and of their time and of their hearts. And that we would be people who live up to the Beatitudes. And then people, when they experience the good deeds that we are doing, will have enough goodwill with us that they might be curious about the good news we have in regard to our King. That's the hope of the Beatitudes. And this is the hope that we have when it comes to these enemies and to this persecution and to this kind of ick that we feel when it comes to trying to be a Christian within this world. John 1 verse 5 says this, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it." We are encouraged to live such good lives among the people who don't believe what we believe, that though they hate us and though they dislike us, that on the day that Jesus returns, they glorify him because they look back and they say, man, those Christians, they stuck out. They were so odd. They were so weird. I couldn't get it, but I wrestled with it. And then that one came and talked to me and invited me to Friendsgiving. They invited me to a life group. They invited me to talk to their super weird pastor, right? They invited me in, and I took a step, and now I'm weird too, right? Now, yeah, right? But I'm also blessed too. I'm figuring out what it means to be a part of the upside down kingdom, where I am a part of the kingdom of heaven, and it changes my perspective. It changes my metrics for success. That's what we're called to, Friends Tustin. That's what we're called to be a church. And we've got to figure out what that looks like together. We don't have to have it all perfect, because guess what? That list of those who are meek or who are mourning or who are poor in spirit, that can be us, and we can still be a part of this kingdom. And we have an enemy, but we'll never take up arms. I'll never ask you to bring a weapon. Instead, what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to be people who are aware and alert of the current of our culture and who know how to swim and stand and push occasionally against the grain, even if there's confrontation or conflict that has to happen, but you would do it in a way that honors the King that you serve. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness cannot extinguish it. That's our hope. We're going to sing one more song. I'm going to invite the team up right now. It talks about the fact that the battle belongs to our God. It's a beautiful song. I want you to understand, though, get this in your mind. It is a battle. There is an enemy. There is a war that exists. And you feel it in your guts and in your bones. And there are people out there who don't have the anchor of Christ, who are just floating downstream. And it is our opportunity to maybe reach out a hand and grab hold of them and be able to say, hey, I know it's going to be hard heading upstream, but it's worth it. And so I want to do that with all of you. It's worth it, people. Because the reward that we have, the reward that was talked about by Jesus, is this idea that he is going to allow us to be a part of the kingdom of heaven. And in the same way they persecuted the prophets, but we get to do it because of Jesus and because of how good he is. So stand to your feet. Let's sing out this song about how God already has the battle taken care of, and we just need to trust him.